Okay, so I'm obviously talking about dairy capability, very much the human side of food safety. And our group was commissioned by Martin Dunn to report to him by Christmas, and we're on track to do that around the capability in the dairy industry, really a stocktake of what we have and what we'll need. And that started off, I'd have to say, to be a fairly daunting task. I recall our first meeting, and I thought to myself, well, there's about a dozen of us, and all other than me were fairly well informed on food safety, so I thought it'd be good to scope out the size of the job and what we had to do. So the group were given a felt pen, brown paper and blue tack, and the idea was to scope out the value chain, the supply chain right through, and the various touch points that dairy food had on it as we went through. We actually ran out of brown paper and blue tack, and we would have run out of wall space at the end of it. And I guess that was very sobering for me, that the scale of food safety, I think it was highlighted earlier, and the touch points food has through the value chain is massive. And to try and regulate for that is close to impossible. So on the plane the way back to Auckland, I did contemplate picking up the telephone and ringing Martin, telling him he needed someone with a larger brain than mine, because it did look like a daunting task. And then we decided to sort of have a look at other sectors and see how other sectors do these things, because obviously we're not unique and sometimes we can become a little internal. So health was something I'd been involved in to quite an extent. It was quite a good place to start. Look at the most senior level in health. They operate a thing called clinical governance. And clinical governance is simply looking at patient safety. And every clinical governance meeting begins with a patient story, and on that clinical governance board is board directors of the main health board. It really doesn't matter what it is, they all do it in New Zealand. And a patient story is fascinating because if you want to drive culture, nothing does it like a patient story, particularly in health, but I'm sure food safety is no different, around the implications of what you do on an individual. And you can deal with the mega billions of dollars, which health does, but it's a very grounding experience to sit on that committee in clinical governance and actually look at what the implications are and what you do, right down to the consumer in this case. So I found that was good, and all my years sitting on dairy company boards, I never ever experienced anything in that regard. Then we looked at financial services, because the other area of this whole issue really is risk management. Risk management is crucial. We've seen in recent times, we did step up with 1080 around risk management, did a lot better job, but a few earlier events you'd have to say we're wanting. Financial services are interesting. Their risk management is superb, but it's regulated by the Reserve Bank. So in the case of risk management, the Reserve Bank have an oversight of financial services companies around how they manage risk, right up to the capability of the governors of those organisations to manage risk. And if they believe they're incapable of doing the job, there is actually a consequence, which is normally not sitting on that board. The third one, which I think was the most enjoyable experience, and maybe in part why you're going to hear from him shortly, but was Captain David Morgan from Air New Zealand. I won't steal his thunder, but why Air New Zealand was particularly fascinating for us to have a look at. They sort of had to capture risk management very strongly, as well as safety, almost embedded together. And you'll know, as consumers of Air New Zealand, and I guess as loyal New Zealanders, how well they've done that through some fairly trying times in the past. So those things were very instructive to us as we went through this whole process, and it actually did make it quite a lot less daunting. We decided today we're quite good. That we gave ourselves about a 7.5 out of 10 going around the room in this whole space. But we also decided there are three trains coming down the track. One, and we've just heard about it, is consumers are changing and what they require. The second one in dairy is product mix is changing. So virtually every dairy company we built was building a nutritional dryer at the time. It was quite instructive and incredible. So that whole product mix thing is changing. And you've got to add then to that government's growth agenda around food. Government have have a strong directive to grow what we're doing in the food space, and obviously with that growth, we have to grow human capability, and frankly, we don't see enough signs of that happening. Our review also included, as you'd expect, MPI, not just the public part of food safety capability, but MPI is an integral part of that, so we also spent some time looking at them. So there were vulnerabilities. Succession for key roles is one that I would highlight. In a number of organisations, including MPI, we identified quite a high, you don't say key man risk these days, key person risk. A number of organisations relied very heavily on a number of very capable people, and that is quite a risk exposure. Leadership in the whole food safety area was something that we're told often was lacking. There were some sort of more specialist areas, toxicology would be one that comes to mind, we're also lacking, but the general theme that came out to the group was leadership in food safety is something that we have to do quite a lot of more work on. Career of choice, another really important one. We didn't actually, I think there was one example I can recall, and he's sitting here today, where it was a career of choice for the individual. Often individuals found themselves in food safety roles accidentally. Now I know that happens across careers, but it seemed to happen much more often in this sector than others. And likewise, when individuals entered university, a career in food safety wasn't what they tended to do. It tended to be something that sort of spilt out. A real positive in this space, no dairy company talked to us. In fact, they all believed they had no competitive advantage in this space, nor did they believe they could ever have one. And I guess out of the whole WPC 80 thing, what I think all companies learnt was all boats rose evenly and sunk evenly, that the New Zealand Inc. brand was way more powerful than any individual dairy company. So I think that is a very powerful thing that we learnt, that we can collaborate in this space because we will only ever be as strong as our weakest link. So I actually saw that as an incredible positive. Education and training. It was there without a doubt, but I have to say it is patchy in its uptake. There could be some improvements in curriculum, but they're probably at the margin. Quite a lot of in-house training, not always documented, so the use of more formal training, not necessarily uptaken to the level that we'd like to see. And once again, this whole issue of the profile of food safety as a career appeared to be very lacking. So an area that certainly isn't broken, but I think one that needs to have a greater focus. And you know, when you see the final report, our recommendations will be around raising the sort of the stature of food safety should sort of have a pull effect on pulling people through the education system when they see this as a career that they can do well in and the industry is desperate for. So we believe we need a paradigm shift in the way we see food safety, and that impacts massively on capability. Governance. I talked about that earlier, both in health and financial services. We didn't see anything similar in the dairy sector. So a couple of companies have made progress since WPC 80, we will acknowledge that, but across the board, governance around food safety I would describe as exception reporting very often. That's tended to be how it's sat, rather than something that would be more proactive on the other side. Perceptions of food safety tended to be narrow, and I guess I'll put my farmer hat on. You know, as a farmer, we probably think of milk quality. We probably don't think too much of food safety. And there's obviously milk quality is important, but it's a component of and isn't food safety alone. Organisational models varied, and you'll hear, well, I suspect you might hear from Air New Zealand around this and how they do that job, but often we saw food safety reporting into manufacturing managers. Now, if you're a manufacturing manager at the peak, your key stress, I guess, is to get the water out of product and to get it out the door as fast as you can. Food safety isn't obviously about that. Some organisations' food safety didn't report into manufacturing, or if it did, it had a dotted line much higher up and somewhere else. We think that is really important, and that's recognised that food safety is crucial, and it's not sort of an add-on to some of the process. It is very much a function in its own right. And weak cross-sector leadership, that's something that came across very strongly, that there are a number of industry bodies out there, but the leadership in this whole space appeared to be less than optimal. So a strong safety culture is, we believe, the best future-proofing we can do for the industry. And you heard a lot about that this morning, and I'm sort of sitting there quite relieved that what I was going to say sort of aligned with it. So that's where we got to. You simply can't regulate across the board for what's needed. It has got to be driven out of a culture. And it has got to be across the value chain, and it is everybody's responsibility. And if you'd seen those pieces of brown paper up on the wall we started with, I can assure you it is everybody's responsibility. There's very few in the chain that aren't touched by food safety. That's incredibly important. So we've got to build a common understanding of food safety, and you'll see in the report we've sort of spent a bit of time on a diagram sort of describing what that looks like. And we've got to talk the same language on it. It sounds pretty basic, but it isn't always happening, and it's pretty important. Leadership, and we have to have boards that are very savvy around food safety. They understand it. They actually understand what their requirements are. I mean, they are in the food business. The most fundamental thing to being in the food business, I guess, is producing safe food that consumers want. So we believe, and you'll see in our recommendations when they come forward, this will be a key component. And it was interesting this morning, I guess you always listen to the things you agree with more than the things you don't, but it was great to listen that it all starts at the top. And fortunately, we've sort of found ourselves in exactly that same position. It does start at governance, to redefine, in some cases, culture in this whole space. Risk management is crucial, absolutely crucial. Simulation exercises, all those sorts of things, and it's important those things, we believe, include the regulator. Very important. So we're not just looking at sort of dairy companies, particularly here in isolation, or the support industries. We're looking at across the value chain around how to manage risk so there are no surprises. So when something inevitably does occur, all parties know what their role is and how they'll discharge that. So culture's got to define capability, and a strong food safety culture, I think, will achieve the things that we want. But as has been said earlier today, easy to say, fairly challenging to deliver on. So to our report, it's currently out for consultation. We decided 2/3 of the way through the process that key players, mainly dairy companies, but not only, should have an opportunity to have some input into it before we present Martin with the final report. We're sort of 2/3 of the way through that. In concept, it's had strong support. There's been a few little items of detail we'll tweak, but probably not a lot more than that. But it'll then, I think in early December, become a public document and hopefully have an effect on food safety. Thank you very much.